MakingAScene.org brings you Using Saturation for Warmth, the digital trick that feels analog. So have you ever found yourself staring at a perfectly clean, perfectly balanced mix and wondering why it still feels, well, totally lifeless? You know, it's not broken, it's not noisy, but it just doesn't jump out of the speakers and grab you. Well, you're absolutely not alone. And in this explainer, we're going to fix exactly that. Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to start by busting the expensive gear myth. Then we'll define what saturation actually is, break down some very cool flavors of analog tone, look at a practical mixing workflow, and wrap it all up with how better mixes literally mean better business. Section 1. The expensive gear myth. Now, according to MakingAScene.org, there's this really frustrating lie floating around the home recording world. It's all about why digital tracks sound flat. They call it the gatekeeper myth. It's this idea that to get character, warmth, and that rich, expensive sound, you absolutely need $1 million studio and a rack full of vintage hardware that costs more than your car. But the reality? The endy reality is that bedroom studios, basements, and garages are the new center of the music business. That's where demos become masters. It's where artists are building real independent careers. MakingAScene.org emphasizes that your home studio setup is actually a massive strength. You see, we don't need a massive console. We just need to understand how to manipulate digital audio to bring back that missing life. Section 2. What saturation actually is. So, if your tracks are super clean but just lack that 3D feel, what's the fix? Saturation. Now, I know the word distortion sounds kind of scary, right? I immediately picture a screaming guitar amp or a blown-out speaker. But MakingAScene.org points out that saturation is simply a gentle, smoother, and honestly a far more musical form of distortion. Back in the analog days, pushing a signal through tubes and tape bent the sound in these really small, pleasing ways. And those bends create extra tones called harmonics. Basically, you're taking a perfectly clean, almost sterile digital signal and adding these beautiful musical imperfections right back into it. And I absolutely love this analogy from MakingAScene.org to illustrate the concept. Think of a vocal note as the main color on a painter's brush. Harmonics are the shades around it. Brilliant, right? By adding those subtle shades, your ear can actually find the main sound so much more easily. It gives your brain more information to grab onto, which makes a lead vocal feel closer and infinitely more human without actually having to just crank up the volume fader. This brings us to a buzzword we hear literally all the time: warmth. The absolutely crucial point here is that warmth does not mean dull. It doesn't mean muffled. Instead, warmth equals body, weight, and texture. Plus, saturation provides this natural, really subtle compression. It gently rounds off those harsh digital peaks so the sound feels controlled and human, rather than, plastic and synthetic. Section 3. Flavors of analog tone. Now that we know what it is, how do we actually use it? Well, the great news is we can borrow these specific flavors from recording history just by using modern plugins. Think of these 4 types as your cheat codes. First up, tape saturation. This is your go-to for smoothness and glue. It is absolutely incredible on a drum bus to take away that stiff, programmed feel. Next is tube saturation, giving you sweetness and presence. Pure magic for making a lead vocal feel incredibly intimate. Then we have transformer saturation. This one provides weight and authority. If your kick or bass needs to feel totally grounded, this is your flavor. And finally, console saturation. This is all about unification. It's subtle, but placing it across your buses glues the tracks together so they sound like they were recorded in the exact same room. What's really interesting is how each flavor solves a highly specific mixing problem. Section 4. A practical mixing workflow. Okay. Theory is great, but let's move into application. MakingAScene.org has a fantastic practical workflow for this. It's a 5-step process, highlighted using Fender Studio Pro as an example, but listen, this logic applies to literally any DAW you happen to be using. Step 1 is totally non-negotiable. Balance first. Seriously, do not reach for saturation to rescue a terrible static mix. Once your levels and basic EQ are dialed in, move to Step 2. The lead vocal, the emotional center of the track. Then Step 3, the bass, to anchor it. Step 4, drums, to add that physical punch. And only at the very end, Step 5, the mix bus, for that final 1% of glue. Let's look a little closer at Step 3, the bass, because this is where saturation acts like a total magic trick. We all know the absolute pain of a massive sub-bass just disappearing completely when you play it back on a tiny phone speaker. Well, saturation solves this. It adds upper harmonics to those low frequencies. So your ear actually hears the distorted mid-range harmonic and tricks your brain into filling in the missing low end. No way, right? MakingAScene.org highly recommends parallel saturation here. Keep your main bass deep and clean, and then blend in a heavily saturated EQ duplicate tucked right underneath it. But before you go saturating every single track in your session, you've got to burn this rule into your memory. The golden rule: gain match before you judge. Saturation inherently makes things louder, and let's be real, human ears are incredibly easily tricked. Louder almost always sounds better to us at first. You absolutely have to lower the output of your saturated track to match the original volume of the dry track. Only then can you bypass the plugin and make an honest decision. Did you actually improve the tone, or did you just make it louder? Because if you don't keep that in check, you are going to fall straight into the saturation trap. Oversaturating is a massive mix killer. Look at these dangers. You can get a blurry, unfocused low end where the kick and bass just turn into absolute mud. You get harsh vocals where the sibilants, those S's and sh sounds, feels like literal needles in your ears. Painful, sharp cymbals that will make a listener instantly hit the skip button. And maybe worst of all, it destroys your front-to-back depth. If everything is just pushed to the front with aggressive harmonics, your mix becomes this flat, exhausting wall of sound. Restraint, my friends, is a professional superpower. Now, to help navigate those dangers, MakingAScene.org points out that we have these incredible AI assistants available today. Things like Isotope Neutron, Plasma, SmartComp, and Gulfos. These tools are phenomenal for training your ears to spot masking issues or even to suggest where adaptive energy might be needed. But just remember, let the AI suggest while you retain the creative control. They're your assistants, not your bosses. Section 5. Better mixes, better business. Let's transition over to the final payoff. Why does all this technical audio tweaking actually matter for an independent artist? Well, it really comes down to this one question. How does audio warmth create real income? I know, it sounds like a bit of a stretch, right? But the business side of mixing is actually incredibly real. When your mix translates beautifully across all devices, doors stay open for you. Take sync licensing, for example. Music supervisors are moving fast. A warm, saturated track feels polished, expensive, and instantly ready for TV or film. Then there's social media. As we talked about earlier, your hooks and bass lines will actually survive those terrible phone speakers, holding a scroller's attention. For direct sales, quality audio builds deep trust with your fans. It shows you care about the product. And ultimately, the emotional presence that saturation brings holds attention longer. And as we know, attention is the currency that fuels your entire fan ecosystem. So we arrive here. Saturation is about feeling, not gear. It's a real emotional bridge between you and the listener. The fan really doesn't care if you used a $2,000 vintage tube preamp or a $20 plugin. They only care if the song moves them. So the next time you open a mix, ask yourself, are you just making things louder, or are you actually making them feel closer? Make sure you check out the other great articles and resources on makingascene.org, the place the indie artist goes to build the new music industry.